Hello, fierce hearts. This is Amara's story, a quiet betrayal, a storm of truth, and one woman's rise from ruin to power. Betrayed, underestimated, but never defeated. On a sweltering June afternoon in the coastal luxury enclave of Carmel by the sea, Amara Kingsley, renowned creative director in the world of high-end interior design, was meticulously arranging fabric swatches on a glass table in her home studio. Her house, nestled against a hillside where lavender bloomed in neat rows across the backyard, had been her sanctuary for over a decade with her husband, Nathaniel Roth, a prominent investment attorney with a gleaming reputation. Their life appeared flawless: charity galas, curated business trips, quiet evenings with jazz and Pinot Noir. But today, the atmosphere in their home felt colder than the ocean breeze slipping through the open balcony door. Nathaniel had come home early, eyes darting, his shirt slightly wrinkled, the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his collar. As he settled into his seat at the dining table, his phone buzzed, twice in quick succession. Then once more, the screen lit up, and a single message fractured the illusion of her perfect life. "I still can't stop thinking about last night. Meet me at our spot? Lila Marin." Amara froze. Lila Marin. The name sliced through her mind like a razor. She was the firm's media coordinator, the one who had once complimented Amara's dress at a fundraising gala with a smile that now felt cruel in retrospect. That name had lingered in the background for months. But here it was, no longer rumor, no longer instinct, proof, a betrayal that cut deeper than infidelity. Nathaniel kept eating, oblivious or pretending, but nothing would ever be the same again. The silence between them wasn't peaceful, it was damning. She didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, she stood slowly, left her untouched meal on the table, and stepped outside to the lavender garden. The breeze carried the scent of salt and summer, but her heart beat with cold fury. She pulled out her phone and called her best friend and legal counsel, Elodie Thorne. "I think I just found the reason to stop pretending," she said, voice trembling but steady. "I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I know I'm not letting this slide." As the sun dipped below the cliffs, casting a golden hue across the garden, Amara stood alone, but no longer uncertain. She had once believed love was permanent, that loyalty was natural. Now, she knew better. A storm was building inside her, fierce and focused. And this time, she wouldn't be the one left broken. 2 days after the text that shattered her marriage, Amara sat alone in her father's old library, the only room in the house that still felt untouched by betrayal. The walls were lined with leather-bound books and vintage sketches from her father's architecture firm. Once the most revered in Northern California, she had come here seeking solace. But instead, she found something else, a cream-colored envelope tucked between 2 volumes on design philosophy. It was addressed to her in her father's handwriting, elegant, deliberate, unmistakable. Her breath caught. Her father, Julian Kingsley, had passed away just months earlier after a quiet battle with Parkinson's. She had mourned him in silence, as Nathaniel stood stoic beside her. But now, this letter, hidden, forgotten, or perhaps placed exactly where he knew she'd one day find it, was waiting like a final whisper across time. With trembling hands, Amara opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, heavy with texture, his signature fountain pen strokes clear as if he'd just written them yesterday. "My Amara, if you're reading this, it means things have shifted. I always believed in your strength, but I also knew life would challenge it. There are things you don't know, about the people closest to you. About Nathaniel, about the firm. Trust your instincts. Use the key. The truth is in the past. Love always. Dad." Her eyes scanned the page again and again, but her pulse didn't slow until she saw it, taped to the inside corner of the envelope. A small brass key with a fleur-de-lis engraving. It looked antique, clearly not for anything modern. Her mind immediately went to the beach cottage her father had maintained near Big Sur, a quiet retreat that had sat locked and dormant since his passing. By sunset, Amara was behind the wheel of her silver coupe, the letter beside her, her heart hammering. The drive down the winding coastline was surreal. Waves crashed against the cliffs as if echoing the turmoil inside her. When she arrived, the cottage was just as she remembered, modest. weathered, but filled with memories of summers spent sketching while her father sipped wine and read the paper. The key slid into the lock of his desk drawer without resistance. Inside, folders, dozens of them, photographs, receipts, correspondence. But what caught her eye first was a red-labeled folder marked Confidential, N. Roth. She opened it, and the world tilted. It was all there: timelines, surveillance stills, financial transfers. Her father had known. Years before his illness, he had suspected Nathaniel of financial misconduct involving the trust funds of high-profile clients. Even more damning were the photos: Nathaniel at quiet dinners with Lila Marin. Long before Amara ever thought to question. And a letter. This one from Julian to his legal team, authorizing a sealed report to be submitted only in the event of Amara's request. She was shaking now, equal parts grief, rage, and validation. Her father hadn't just left behind a legacy, he'd left behind a blueprint for truth. He'd seen the cracks before she did. And while he hadn't said a word in life, he'd armed her in death. Amara stared out the window at the darkening sea. Her marriage wasn't the only lie she had to unravel. Her father's empire, and her future, were being quietly undermined. But not anymore. Not on her watch. She reached for her phone. Dialed Elodie. "It's bigger than I thought," she said, "and it's time we bring the whole thing down." Back in San Francisco, armed with the evidence from her father's hidden files, Amara moved swiftly. She met Elodie Harrington, her longtime best friend and now legal counsel, in a private corner of the Kingsley and Roth building. The boardroom once reserved for high-profile investor meetings now became the war room. Sprawled across the glass table were photographs, financial statements, and documented communications, each one another knot in the tangled web Nathaniel had spun behind her back. "It's not just cheating," Amara murmured, her voice cold and steady. "It's calculated. It's criminal." Elodie nodded grimly. "It's embezzlement, wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. And he's not acting alone." As the two women delved deeper, the extent of the betrayal unfolded like a grotesque tapestry. Nathaniel, once the charming golden boy of Kingsley and Roth, had used Amara's trust, and her father's fading health, as an opportunity. With Lila Marin, a real estate developer known for cutting corners and courting controversy, Nathaniel had quietly redirected trust funds into shell accounts connected to luxury development deals in Miami, Lisbon, and Dubai. These accounts were masked through offshore entities, but Julian's meticulous documentation had uncovered them all. It was a masterclass in deception, and Nathaniel had almost gotten away with it. The sickening twist? Amara realized her name was attached to several of the accounts. Not because she had authorized them, but because Nathaniel had forged her signature, using his access to her personal documents. "He's setting you up," Elodie said, her voice sharp. "If anything collapses, the fall lands on you." Amara's blood ran cold. The betrayal had gone beyond the personal. This was professional sabotage, meant to destroy everything her father had built and everything she was meant to inherit. Reed Callahan, a seasoned investigator known for his discretion, was brought in that evening. Within hours, he confirmed what Julian's files had only hinted at. Several board members were complicit, or at least willfully blind. "Nathaniel's smart," Reed said, flipping through a dossier. "He didn't just steal. He bought silence, bonuses, trips, even tuition payments. He's been greasing wheels for years." Amara stared out the window of the office tower that bore her family's name. She had walked these marble floors thinking she was a respected partner, a rightful heir. But she'd been surrounded by sharks the entire time, and she hadn't smelled the blood until it was almost too late. "I want every account traced," she said to Reed. "Every signature, every name, every flight. I want them exposed." Elodie leaned forward, her voice low. "This isn't going to be pretty." "It's not supposed to be," Amara replied. "It's war." As they mapped out the next steps, one thing became clear. Nathaniel Roth hadn't just broken vows, he had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to dismantle the Kingsley legacy from within. But in his arrogance, he had underestimated the one woman who had the power. And now the proof. To burn it all down. The tension within the Kingsley family estate became a storm Amara could no longer contain. After uncovering Nathaniel's scheme, she turned to the one person she hoped might still be an ally, her brother. Julian Kingsley. Once inseparable as children, the years and the burden of legacy had pulled them apart. Julian had remained neutral during the initial fallout, more concerned with preserving the firm's image than taking sides. But when Amara presented him with the documents, offshore accounts, forged signatures, siphoned trust funds, his face went pale. "I knew he was ambitious," Julian muttered, sinking into their father's old leather chair. "But I didn't think he'd betray you like this." Amara expected outrage, maybe even support. What she didn't expect was hesitation. "We have to go public," she said firmly. "The board needs to see this." "The press." Julian cut her off. "You want to air this in the middle of Dad's Memorial Week? The firm will implode." She stared at him, disbelief hardening into fury. "You think I care about press optics? He's using my name in criminal accounts. Julian. He seduced his way into this family and now he's trying to gut it from the inside." Julian stood, pacing, torn between loyalty to his sister and fear of scandal. "Dad built this firm with blood and grit. If this goes public, everything he worked for, everything we inherit, burns." Amara's voice cracked. "So what? We protect a name and let a liar walk free?" Their mother, Evelyn Kingsley, entered the room just as voices began to rise. Dressed in quiet black, she listened in silence as the confrontation played out. Then finally said, "Your father anticipated this. That's why he left the letter with the key. He trusted you, Amara, not just to inherit, but to fight." Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned with the same fire Amara now carried. Julian turned to his mother. "You knew?" Evelyn nodded slowly. "He suspected Nathaniel. He told me you were the only one who would do what needed to be done." The room fell silent. Legacy, blood, betrayal, it all sat heavy in the air. Amara looked at her brother, her mother, and the looming portrait of her father that hung above the fireplace. She realized then that family didn't mean unconditional support, it meant hard choices. Painful truths, and sometimes standing alone for what was right. Julian finally exhaled. "I'll back you, but once this starts, there's no going back." Amara's voice was steel. "Good, because I have no intention of turning around." The day of the will reading arrived cloaked in sharp suits, cold glances, and carefully staged grace. Kingsley and Daughter's old law offices, an opulent, wood-paneled sanctuary built by generations of family money, now buzzed with tension thick enough to slice through. Amara arrived early, dressed in tailored navy and resolve, carrying more than grief in her presence. She wasn't there to mourn. She was there to make sure the war her father anticipated played out on her terms. Across the mahogany conference table sat Nathaniel Hawthorne, cool and composed in a bespoke gray suit, his fingers drumming rhythmically as if he already knew the outcome. Beside him was Cecily Darjong, the PR darling with the smile of a viper, his alleged co-conspirator and polished partner in ambition. Their expressions betrayed no fear, only calculation. Evelyn Kingsley entered next, widow turned matriarch, every inch the elegant steel her late husband had relied on. She gave no nod to Nathaniel, nor did she acknowledge Cecily. Her loyalty was as deliberate as her silence. Julian followed, somber and sleep-deprived, but now on Amara's side, at least outwardly. The Kingsleys were a fractured family walking into a battlefield disguised as a boardroom. Finally, Archibald Vale, the family's longtime attorney and executor, stepped in. His silver hair wild with age, but his presence commanding. In his hands, a weathered leather briefcase, the same one Amara remembered from every major legal moment of her life. He placed it on the table, cleared his throat, and began, the final will and testament of Ambrose Kingsley. As Archibald read the first part aloud, tension unfurled like smoke. The estate, estimated at over $200 million, was to be divided into trusts. A controlling stake in the Kingsley Foundation would remain with the family, and specific allocations were outlined for Evelyn, Julian, and Amara. At first, everything sounded predictable, fair, boring, even, until Archibald paused. "There is, however, a codicil to the will," he said, eyes glinting beneath his spectacles. "Filed 72 hours before Mr. Kingsley's death." Nathaniel's expression flickered. Cecily leaned forward, the the first sign of unease cracking her veneer. Archibald continued. The inheritance of any trust or role in the family foundation is now contingent upon an internal ethics investigation and a formal audit of company accounts spanning the last 18 months. A silence fell like stone. Amara watched Nathaniel's jaw tighten. Cecily's eyes darted toward him. Calculating escape routes. Archibald raised a folder. Said investigation has already commenced. Preliminary findings will be submitted to the probate judge next week. Should any misconduct be confirmed, financial, ethical, or personal, those named will forfeit all rights and holdings, as stipulated in the codicil. Julian let out a low whistle. It wasn't just a will, it was a trap. And her father, even in death, had loaded the first chamber. Amara sat straighter in her chair. Heart steady now. She didn't need revenge. She had something far more dangerous, leverage wrapped in legacy. And this time, it was her move. The boardroom ambush was just the opening act. What came next was orchestrated with surgical precision, and Amara played the role of conductor with icy poise. 1 week after the will reading, she hosted the annual Kingsley Foundation Benefit Gala at the Delacroix Museum. A glass and marble fortress of modern philanthropy that her father had once helped fund. It was supposed to be a night of legacy and giving. Instead, it became a crucible where masks melted. The guest list included city elites, influential donors, and, notably, every major media outlet from business channels to gossip blogs. Nathaniel Hawthorne and Cecily Darjong arrived fashionably late, dressed to dazzle, believing their presence would reinforce their image of power and continuity. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that by stepping onto that stage, they were already halfway to ruin. The gallery glimmered with curated art. String quartets echoed softly across glass walls, and champagne glasses clinked with the usual backroom deals dressed up in sequins. But tucked among the displays were discreet QR codes mounted beside Kingsley Legacy portraits, part of a tribute installation supposedly honoring the family's philanthropic impact. Guests scanned them, expecting stories of schools and hospitals. What they got instead were leaked financial documents, annotated timelines, and redacted email threads, all time-stamped and legally vetted. It began quietly, a flicker of confusion, a few hushed murmurs, then sudden gasps. One screen near the main hall flickered to life. A curated video reel played on loop, narrated in Ambrose Kingsley's own voice. Extracted from old interviews, juxtaposed with damning evidence of how Nathaniel and Cecily siphoned funds through shell companies, falsified donor expenses, and strong-armed junior board members into silence. The room turned electric. Nathaniel froze mid-toast, his glass suspended in the air like a broken illusion. Cecily paled visibly, her lipstick suddenly garish under the shifting lights. Across the room, Julian watched in stunned admiration while Evelyn Kingsley remained rooted, eyes sharp and unreadable. She had known, Amara realized, or at least suspected. That's why she hadn't interfered. She had been waiting, testing if her daughter could carry the Kingsley name into war without flinching. Then came the final blow, the press embargo lifted. Within minutes, headlines exploded across every screen. Kingsley betrayal, $4.6 million misappropriated under Nathaniel Hawthorne's watch. A follow-up article detailed Cecily's Shadow Foundation, an influencer wellness nonprofit that funneled donations into luxury apartments and private retreats. Amara didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She stood silently in the upper gallery, backlit by a sweeping installation of her father's favorite painting, watching the empire crack from within. Down below, cameras turned on Nathaniel, questions flew, and donors began backing away like rats from a sinking ship. When Nathaniel finally spotted her, his face contorted, not with rage, but with disbelief. She hadn't screamed, she hadn't threatened, she had simply removed the veil. And now, there was nothing left to shield him from the truth. He took a step forward, but Amara turned away before he could reach her. By the time the board demanded Nathaniel's resignation and issued a formal apology, the damage had calcified. Cecily disappeared from public view within 24 hours. Anonymous sources confirmed her passport flagged at a private airport heading toward a country with no extradition treaty. But the scandal followed her like a shadow stitched into silk. In the days that followed, Amara's inbox overflowed, not just with messages of praise and press requests, but with quiet thank yous from interns, junior executives, and long-forgotten foundation staffers who had once been silenced or sidelined. One email simply read, "You did what none of us could." And that night, as she sat alone in her father's study, the fire crackling softly behind her, Amara finally opened the leather-bound journal he'd left behind. On the first page, in his looping script, were 8 words: "Legacy isn't inherited. It's defended, one truth at a time." She smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached her eyes. The storm after the exposure was not a mere drizzle of scandal, it was a legal monsoon. Within 48 hours of the Kingsley Gala, civil and criminal suits began to materialize like thunderheads. Nathaniel Hawthorne, once the golden boy face of corporate philanthropy, was served with a federal subpoena before breakfast. Cecily Darjong, still abroad, found her assets frozen, her accounts flagged, and her name plastered across international headlines alongside phrases like fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to defraud a charitable organization. But it was Amara Kingsley who stepped into the spotlight, not as a victim, but as a witness with power, proof, and poise. The courtroom was packed the morning Nathaniel's hearing began, reporters elbowed for space, while former allies kept their heads low. Amara arrived in a tailored navy suit, her expression carved from the same marble as the Kingsley courthouse steps. Julian sat behind her in quiet solidarity, a notepad in hand, scribbling furiously for what he claimed was the most important feature of his career. Evelyn Kingsley didn't attend, but her absence only added weight to the silence. It was clear she had cast her vote privately, and not in Nathaniel's favor. Amara took the stand on the second day, calm and surgical in her testimony. She detailed how she found the coded ledgers, uncovered the offshore transfers, and traced the threads of deceit through the Kingsley Foundation's records. The prosecution displayed key exhibits, the leaked documents, internal emails, the QR-coded files from the gala, and tied it all back to Nathaniel's authorization and Cecily's execution. The defense tried to paint Amara as emotionally compromised, a vengeful daughter with a personal vendetta. But she didn't flinch. "I didn't do this for revenge," she told the court, voice steady. "I did this because the truth matters more than legacy. My father built something beautiful." They tried to hollow it out. The silence that followed her words was broken only by the sound of a reporter's pen scribbling across a notepad. Then came the bombshell, a new witness, summoned by Amara's legal team. A former accountant at the foundation, fired quietly 2 years earlier, testified that Nathaniel had ordered multiple backdated entries to conceal financial discrepancies and pressured staff into compliance with threats of blacklisting. Her voice cracked at times, but her facts were bulletproof. The jury leaned forward, the judge took notes, and Nathaniel? His face went slack with the realization that the world he once ruled was collapsing in real time. By the end of the week, Nathaniel had entered a plea bargain, reduced sentence in exchange for a full confession and restitution agreement. Cecily, still overseas, issued a public denial through her legal team, but the court of public opinion was already unforgiving. Foundations cut ties, sponsors withdrew, her personal brand collapsed under the weight of scrutiny. Within months, she was indicted in absentia, an international warrant hovering over her designer-cloaked shadow. For Amara, the victory was not in the sentencing, it was in the reckoning. The courtroom had become a crucible, burning away the illusions of loyalty and decorum. The Kingsley name, long synonymous with power, was now being redefined by truth, by accountability, and by the daughter who refused to stay silent. As she stepped down from the witness stand, Julian met her with a quiet nod. "You didn't just win," he said later. "You rewrote the legacy." And in a city built on masks and lineage, Amara Kingsley had done the unthinkable. She made justice more powerful than blood. The months that followed the trial were quieter, but no less transformative. The media frenzy faded, replaced by deliberate silence from the social circles that once fawned over the Hawthorns. The Kingsley name no longer triggered scandal, but curiosity. Whispers turned to admiration as Amara Kingsley emerged not as the daughter of a disgraced legacy, but as the architect of a new one. She didn't return to the shadows or disappear into a retreat, as many had expected. Instead, she stood firm in the storm's wake, sleeves rolled up, and eyes set on something far greater than vengeance. The Kingsley Foundation, once a prestigious philanthropic entity now tainted by fraud, was on the brink of collapse. Its board had dissolved, donors fled, and programs paused. But Amara refused to let her father's original vision be buried beneath Nathaniel's greed. With the help of Julian and Evelyn, who had returned with quiet contrition, Amara orchestrated a complete overhaul. The foundation was renamed the Elysian Trust, a nod to renewal and hope. It retained none of the former board, brought in forensic accountants, ethics officers, and grassroots leaders from the very communities it once claimed to serve. Every dollar moving through the trust became transparent, publicly listed in monthly reports. Amara led town halls instead of galas, met with volunteers instead of donors, and prioritized rebuilding trust over reputations. The city, skeptical at first, watched with cautious awe as the Elysian Trust quietly began restoring scholarships, funding youth mentorship programs, and launching legal clinics for whistleblowers and vulnerable workers. It was philanthropy without ego, legacy without spectacle. Personally, Amara took time to rebuild herself. 2. Her penthouse in Midtown was sold, replaced by a modest brownstone in Chelsea filled with books, plants, and the kind of quiet she never knew she needed. Therapy became a ritual, not a remedy. She reconnected with old friends she'd lost while orbiting the Hawthorne's world. And slowly, she began letting people in again. Julian remained by her side, not as a journalist chasing a story, but as someone who had become integral to her healing. Their conversations were long, honest, and often laced with wine and silence. One evening, as they walked through the newly reopened Elysian Youth Center, once a vanity project, now a real sanctuary, he turned to her and said, "You turned rubble into roots." She smiled, knowing it was true. Everything that had burned was now soil for something stronger. Evelyn, though still visibly haunted by her misjudgments, became one of the trust's biggest advocates. "Your father believed in redemption," she said during a small donor meeting. And Amara proved that it's not just for those who fall, but for those who dare to rise after being pushed down. Amara didn't seek headlines anymore. Her story had already been told. What mattered now was the legacy she was building, one that would never again be built on lies. And though ghosts of the past still lingered in hallways and old photographs, they no longer held power. She had faced them, named them, and moved forward, not untouched, but unbroken. Rebuilding wasn't glamorous. It was tedious, exhausting, and at times lonely, but it was also honest. It was hers, and as spring arrived, bringing with it new growth, longer light, and the distant sound of children laughing in Elysian's courtyard, Amara Kingsley finally let herself believe she hadn't just survived the fire. She had become the flame. The evening air shimmered with warmth as twilight settled over the newly inaugurated rooftop terrace of the Elysian Trust. String lights cast a golden glow over tables adorned with simple white florals. Laughter echoing gently against the skyline. Amara stood at the center, a flute of champagne in hand, surrounded by people who had witnessed her fall, stood by her rebuild, and now toasted her rise. Julian lingered nearby, his smile quiet but unwavering, while Evelyn mingled with community organizers, her eyes softer than they'd been in years. Amara cleared her throat, and the room hushed. "This isn't just a celebration of a building," she began, her voice steady. "It's a celebration of what comes after betrayal, after fire, after loss. This is for the second chances we give ourselves when no one else will. For truth, for resilience, and for futures that bloom from broken ground." Glasses clinked, and as the first notes of live jazz drifted through the air, Amara exhaled, not from relief, but release. The city below pulsed with life, unaware of the quiet revolution happening above. And as Amara looked out across the crowd, her heart finally unburdened, she whispered to herself the words her father once said, "The garden always grows back brighter." Tonight wasn't about what was lost. It was about everything yet to come. The story of Amara Ellison teaches us that even the deepest betrayals cannot extinguish the light within us. When faced with manipulation, greed, and loss, Amara chose not revenge, but purpose. Her journey reminds us that strength isn't found in silence or survival alone, it's in reclaiming your voice, your truth, and your future. With courage, support, and clarity, she turned a web of deceit into a foundation for justice and renewal. In the end, the greatest lesson is this: the ones who rise from ashes don't just survive, they bloom. And in doing so, they light the path for others to follow.